If you have a 401k, you probably assume somebody sat down and designed it to be America's retirement system. They didn't. Nobody did. This $10 trillion machine, the thing that 70 million Americans are quietly counting on to carry them into old age, was never actually designed to do that job at all. It began life as an 869-word footnote buried in a 1978 tax law written for wealthy executives and their deferred pay, not for you. Then one benefits consultant read that fine print differently than anyone was ever supposed to. A nervous bank refused to touch his idea, and the tax authorities, almost by accident, waved the whole thing through. And the pension, the thing your grandparents actually retired on, got quietly escorted out the back door. So who really designed the 401k? Nobody did. And by the end of this, the very man who helped switch it on will be standing here, warning us about what it became. To see how any of that happened, we have to go back, not to the footnote, but to the world that came before it. First, the thing itself, in plain terms. A 401k is a savings account bolted onto your job. You divert part of your paycheck into it before the tax office takes its cut. Your employer often drops in a matching contribution on top, and then you invest the pile yourself, hoping it grows until you retire. Simple enough. And enormous. Today, 401k accounts hold around $10.1 trillion, spread across roughly 70 million active savers. Zoom out. And they are one slab of a $49 trillion mountain of American retirement money. This is not some niche product for the finance-obsessed. For a huge share of working Americans, this kind of account is the main pillar of whatever retirement they will actually get, the whole floor of the national retirement system. Which is exactly what makes the origin story so odd. Something this big, this load-bearing, this central to tens of millions of lives you would assume was built on purpose by people who meant to build it. It was not. And to see how strange that is, you first have to look at the world it quietly replaced. So before we rewind, let's put the whole myth up on the wall, because almost every piece of it is wrong. Fake number one, that some wise committee sat down and designed the 401k as America's retirement plan. Fake number two, that it was deliberately built to replace the pension. Fake number three, that the whole thing was, from the very start, meant for you, the ordinary worker. Keep those three fakes in your head as we go, because we are going to watch them fall, one by one. By 1978, fake number three collapses. By 1981, fake number one goes down. And by the time we reach the Great Handover, fake number two turns out to be far more tangled than almost anyone admits. The real story has a 28-year-old lawyer drafting a clause about executive bonuses, a nervous bank that said no thank you, and a system that basically snuck up on an entire country while it wasn't looking. So treat everything that follows as a hunt for the fakes, until the accidental truth is left standing in plain view. And it begins with the thing the 401k quietly demolished. A world where retirement was somebody else's responsibility, and emphatically not yours. For much of the 20th century, retirement in America ran on something called a defined benefit pension. And the deal from where you sat was beautifully simple. You worked for a company for decades, and in return, that company promised to pay you a fixed check every single month for the rest of your life. You didn't have to pick investments. You didn't have to guess how long you would live or what the stock market might do to your savings. That was the company's problem. The employer set the money aside, took the investment risk, and carried the promise on its own shoulders. Now, an honesty check, because this part gets romanticized. Pensions were never universal. Even at their peak, only a minority of private sector workers, by most estimates well under half, were actually covered by one. But if you had a solid union job or a big steady employer, retirement was simply something that happened to you, arranged by somebody else. Work the decades, collect the gold watch, let the monthly check roll in. It was, above all, not your job to figure out. That was the old deal. The company carried the risk and you just retired. Now watch the quiet swap. Over the next 7 years, Congress will try to shore that promise up. A young lawyer will write 869 words for something else entirely. And slowly, the risk will start sliding off the company's books and onto your paycheck. Let's start in 1974, before the famous paragraph even existed. Some large pension funds had collapsed. Workers had been left with nothing, and Congress stepped in with a landmark law known as ERISA. In plain terms, ERISA was a rulebook to protect pensions, forcing companies to fund their promises properly, and setting up a government insurer, the PBGC, to catch plans that failed. Good intentions, real protections. But here is the quiet twist that matters for our story. All those new rules, all that funding discipline and insurance and paperwork, made running a pension more expensive and far more unpredictable for the companies on the hook for it. A pension was now a long, legally binding, decades-deep promise, sitting right there on the books, its true costs swinging with interest rates and with how long the retirees kept living. for a chief financial officer squinting at next quarter's profits, that began to look less like a proud benefit and more like a lurking hazard. Nobody had killed the pension yet, but 1974 quietly loaded the gun. Which brings us at last to the footnote. In 1978, Congress passed a sprawling tax bill called the Revenue Act, and buried deep inside it was a short new section, numbered 401K, 869 words. It was drafted by a 28-year-old congressional lawyer named Richard Stanger for the Joint Committee on Taxation, and championed by a congressman called Barbara Conable. And here is the part everything hinges on. It was not written to spark a retirement revolution. Its purpose was narrow and technical, to tidy up the tax treatment of deferred compensation, the bonuses and cash that mostly well-paid executives chose to push into next year. In the dry language of the code, it dealt with what were called cash or deferred arrangements, the simple question of whether you take your pay now, as cash, or defer it and let the tax bill wait. That is it, a neat little clause about when tax gets paid on money you set aside. And let's be precise here, because critics love to pounce. The words themselves were written deliberately. Congress meant to pass them, what nobody intended. The thing that genuinely was an accident was what those words would eventually grow into. In 1978, Section 401K was a rounding error in the tax code, and it just sat there for 2 years, meaning almost nothing to almost nobody. Enter Ted Benna. In 1980, Benna was a benefits consultant at a Pennsylvania firm called the Johnson Companies. And no, not Johnson & Johnson, a much smaller outfit. A client of his, a bank, had asked him to design a better savings plan for its staff. So Benna went hunting through the tax code for something he could use, and his eyes landed on that quiet little clause, Section 401K. And he read it in a way its authors never had. If the law let employees defer part of their pay before tax, Benna reasoned, then why couldn't ordinary workers use it to save straight out of their paychecks, month after month, with the company adding a matching contribution to sweeten the pot, not executives shuffling bonuses around? Everybody, a do-it-yourself retirement account. Hiding in plain sight inside a clause meant for something else. It was a genuinely clever reading. It was also completely uninvited. The 401K, as you know it, was not handed down from on high by lawmakers. It was reverse engineered out of their fine print by a consultant who was simply looking for an edge. And this is where the whole thing should have quietly ended. Benna carried his clever new plan back to the bank, the very client who had asked him for it. And the bank said no. They turned it down flat. Their fear was, in its own way, perfectly logical. The idea leaned on an unglamorous loophole, and they were sure that the moment Washington saw how much tax revenue was quietly walking out the door, it would slam that loophole shut and punish anyone caught using it. Too risky. So the first ever 401K had no customer, no sponsor, and no future. Its own inventor was left holding a design that nobody would touch. So Benna did the only thing left to do. He made his own company the guinea pig, effective January 1981, and just sit with the comedy of that. America's $10 trillion retirement system survives partly because the people it was first pitched to were too frightened to try it, and its inventor had to become his own first customer. The accident very nearly didn't happen at all. So the loophole was live, running in one small company in Pennsylvania, with the bank's dark prophecy hanging over the whole thing. Would the government really let this stand? This was the moment it could all have quietly ended. Instead, the exact opposite happened. In November of 1981, the tax authorities did the one thing Benna's nervous client never saw coming. The IRS issued proposed rules that didn't strangle the idea in its cradle. They blessed it. The regulators explicitly said yes, employees may defer salary before tax, and yes, employers may match it. The loophole was not a mistake to be corrected. It was now officially and formally endorsed by the United States government. And that single decision changed the physics of everything. An accidental reading by one consultant had just been upgraded into a legitimate, sanctioned way for any company in America to offer retirement savings. The footnote had a green light, and a country full of benefits managers who had spent years watching pensions curdle into an expensive migraine suddenly had a shiny new option that was cheaper, lighter, and now completely legal. From there, adoption did not creep. It stampeded. All through the 1980s, big employers raced to roll out 401k plans, and to understand why, you only have to look at who won from each angle. For the company, it was a dream. No lifetime promise to keep funding. No unpredictable liability lurching around on the balance sheet. They simply offered to match whatever workers put in, and their obligation ended right there. Predictable, cheap, and mostly off the books. For the worker, it honestly didn't feel like a downgrade at all. It felt like free money. Put in $1 and watch your employer set 50 cents down beside it. Who on earth says no to that? And for the financial industry, well, tens of millions of brand new accounts, all needing somewhere to invest, was the business opportunity of a generation. Everybody in the room had their own reason to fall in love with it. The pension, meanwhile, had become the awkward thing companies wanted quietly gone. The 401k was the door-marked exit, and through the 80s and 90s, corporate America poured straight through it. And this is the accident's real legacy, the piece that reshaped ordinary life. The old defined benefit pension didn't so much die as get politely escorted out. Ted Benna himself is blunt about why, and in his telling it wasn't really the 401k that killed pensions at all. It was that pensions were already doomed. Between the ERISA rules, the insurance premiums, and accounting changes that forced companies to show their wobbling pension costs right there on their quarterly profits, the old promise had turned into a financial hazard that bosses could not wait to shed. The 401k simply handed them a graceful exit. Over the following decades, the private sector pension slid from common to rare, while the do-it-yourself account quietly became the default. The exact figures on that shift are debated, and genuinely worth checking against government data, but the direction of travel is not in any doubt. A country where your employer used to carry your retirement had, in barely a generation, handed the entire job over to you. And the strangest part is how few people notice the handover happening at all. Now, if you have ever squinted at your own statement and wondered whether your 401k is quietly bleeding money in fees, you are not alone. And here is the remarkable part. The man who helped create it agrees with you. Ted Benna, decades on, has said he is disturbed by what his invention became. His complaint was never that saving was bad. It was that the financial industry gathered around all these new accounts and slowly realized how much money could be made from them, rather than less. And so in his telling, layer upon layer of fees quietly got added on. And this is not some faded quote from a dusty archive. Benna is still here, in his 80s, and he keeps saying it. As recently as a high-profile television interview in 2025, telling a national audience once again that he is troubled by where the whole thing ended up, which is genuinely rare. Most of the people who build the giant systems of our lives are long gone before anyone thinks to ask whether it all went to plan. This one is still in the room, still second-guessing it out loud. Now, one important line. That is Benna's view, reported strictly as his, and it is not financial advice and not a verdict from us. But as a story beat, it lands hard. The accident didn't just grow enormous. It got away from the very man who set it loose. So here is that $10 trillion figure one more time, except now it should mean something completely different to you. At the very start, $10.1 trillion sounded like proof of design, the obvious output of a system that somebody, somewhere, must have carefully planned. But walk back through everything we have just seen, and the same number reads the exact opposite way. It is not proof of design, it is proof of accumulation. One clause, one consultant's workaround, one nervous rejection, one regulatory yes, and then one employer after another after another. That 869-word footnote now anchors the retirement of an entire nation. Roughly 70 million Americans pay into these accounts. One wing of a total retirement pile that just hit a record $49 trillion, sitting alongside another $19 trillion in individual retirement accounts. This is the machinery that now decides, in large part, whether tens of millions of people can ever afford to stop working. And none of it was planned by a commission or drawn up by some great reformer. It simply went from words almost nobody bothered to read, to a single line on a payroll form, to one of the largest pools of money anywhere on earth. The single most important number in your retirement may be resting on the least intentional foundation in all of modern finance. But the deepest change the accident made isn't a number at all. It is about who carries the danger. Remember the old pension. The company took the investment risk and promised you a fixed check no matter what the market did. The 401k quietly flipped that around, one variable at a time. Now you choose the investments. You absorb the market's booms and crashes. You are the one gambling on how long you'll live and whether your savings can possibly outlast you. An entire nation's retirement risk was lifted off the shoulders of employers and set down onto individuals, one paycheck at a time, and there was never a vote on it. Never a great national debate. It simply happened, plan by plan. And it left real holes. The 401k works best for people who already have steady jobs and generous employers. If you are a gig worker, or at a tiny firm, or scraping by on low wages, there may be no plan, no match, no account at all. A system that arrived by accident was never designed to catch everyone. And so, quietly, it doesn't. This is not a lecture about what should be done. It is simply the shape of what the footnote really built. So let's go right back to those three fakes, and watch the last of them fall. Fake number one, that the 401k was designed as America's retirement plan. No, nobody designed it for that. Fake number three, that it was always meant for ordinary workers. No, it was built for executives and reverse engineered for the rest of us almost by accident. And fake number 2, that it was created to replace the pension. Well, not quite. It didn't so much kill the pension as hand employers the exit door they were already desperate to walk through. So what is the real lesson here? Not that the 401k is a scam, and not that it was some master plan. It is that the giant financial systems of our lives don't always get designed at all. Sometimes they simply accrete, out of a footnote nobody read closely, a clever reading nobody sanctioned, a client's lucky refusal, a regulator's shrug. And then they harden, until a whole country is standing on top of them, and pulling them apart again feels impossible. This one began as 869 words that almost nobody noticed. And now it sits inside your paycheck.